They gathered in their black suits and designer dresses, umbrellas held high against the storm. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered into microphones. The financial world had come to mourn Ethan Blake, tech visionary, self-made billionaire, the man who built an empire from nothing. But 50 feet away, hidden behind a crumbling mausoleum, stood a man they would never recognize. His clothes were torn and mud-stained, his face weathered by months on the streets. His hands trembled as he watched them lower the empty casket into the ground. Because Ethan Blake wasn't dead. He was standing right there, watching his own name being carved into history. The woman at the front of the crowd collapsed into sobs. Clara, his wife, the love of his life. She wore the black dress he had bought her for their anniversary, the one they never got to celebrate. She didn't know he could see her. She didn't know he had been trying to reach her for 6 months. She didn't know that everything she believed about his death was a carefully constructed lie. What if the person you loved most in this world moved on with their life, not knowing you were still alive, not knowing you were fighting every single day to get back to them, not knowing that powerful forces had erased you from existence? Tonight, you're about to witness a story that will make you question everything you think you know about power, betrayal, and survival. This is the story of a man who had everything and lost it all in one night. But the real question is, why? His name was Ethan Blake, 42 years old, a man who started with nothing and built everything. From a cramped apartment in Brooklyn where he coded through the night, surviving on instant noodles and black coffee, to the glass towers of Manhattan where his name became synonymous with innovation. Blake Technologies revolutionized artificial intelligence, creating systems that changed how the world communicated, worked, and lived. But Ethan never forgot where he came from. While other billionaires collected yachts and private islands, he collected causes. Clean water initiatives in Africa, education programs in rural America, medical research that gave hope to the hopeless. The press called him the conscience of Silicon Valley. His competitors called him naive. His wife, Clara, called him home. Clara Blake was the kind of woman who made wealth look effortless, yet never let it define her. She met Ethan when he was nobody, when his company was just a dream scribbled in notebooks and his bank account hovered near zero. She believed in him when investors laughed him out of boardrooms. She stood beside him through 18-hour workdays and countless failures. And when success finally came, when the money poured in and the world wanted a piece of him, she kept him grounded. They married on a beach in Costa Rica with 20 guests and no photographers. While the tech world threw elaborate parties, Ethan and Clara spent their evenings in their home library, her head on his shoulder, planning their next foundation project. They had no children yet, but they had plans, a family, a future, forever. Then came March 15th, 5 years ago. Ethan was flying to a charity conference in Miami, a private jet, routine flight. He had made the trip dozens of times. Clara kissed him goodbye that morning, straightened his tie, and made him promise to call when he landed. He smiled, pulled her close, and whispered the words he said every time they parted. "Nothing in this world could keep me from coming back to you." 12 hours later, the Coast Guard found debris scattered across 70 miles of ocean. Parts of the fuselage, a seat cushion, one of Ethan's shoes, but no bodies, no survivors. The investigation concluded that mechanical failure caused a catastrophic engine fire. The plane went down in a storm. The ocean swallowed everything. For 3 weeks, Clara refused to believe it. She hired private search teams. She called in every favor, spent millions trying to find him. But the ocean kept its secrets. Eventually,
Even hope has to surrender to reality. The memorial service was held on a cliff overlooking the sea. Thousands attended. World leaders sent condolences. The tech industry mourned the loss of one of its brightest minds. Clara stood at that cliff, Ethan's wedding ring clutched in her hand, and whispered goodbye to the only man she had ever loved. For 5 years she carried that grief like a stone in her chest. She moved through life performing the motions of living, but never truly alive. She took over the Blake Foundation, pouring herself into the work Ethan had started. If she couldn't have him, she would honor his memory. Every school built, every well dug, every life saved became a tribute to the man who had changed her world. She kept his study exactly as he left it, his reading glasses on the desk, his favorite sweater draped over the chair, and every night, without fail, she placed his wedding ring on the nightstand beside her bed before she closed her eyes. The world moved on. The news cycle found new tragedies. Blake Technologies merged with a larger corporation. Ethan's face faded from magazine covers. Life, as it always does, continued. But Clara never stopped waiting. She never stopped hoping that somehow, impossibly, the ocean had been wrong. And then, on a cold November evening, 5 years to the day after the crash, her doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone. The staff had gone home. The house was quiet. She walked to the door, annoyed at the interruption, and opened it without checking the security camera. A man stood on her doorstep, thin, hollow-eyed, wearing clothes that had seen too many streets and too many nights. A beard covered most of his face. Scars marked his skin. But his eyes, those eyes she would recognize in any lifetime, in any form. Her hand flew to her mouth. The world tilted. Her knees buckled. Because standing in front of her, looking like a ghost pulled from the depths of the ocean itself, was Ethan Blake. Her husband, the man she buried 5 years ago, the man whose ring still sat beside her bed. He was alive, and the nightmare was only beginning.
The first 72 hours after the crash were a blur of pain and salt water. Ethan remembered the explosion, the screaming metal, the way the ocean rose up to meet him like a hungry mouth. He remembered hitting the water so hard it felt like concrete, then nothing but darkness and cold. When he woke, he was on a rocky shore. His body was broken, 3 ribs fractured, his left arm shattered, a gash across his skull that should have killed him, but somehow his heart kept beating. The men who found him weren't heroes. They were fishermen from a village that existed on maps but had been forgotten by governments. They saw a man in expensive clothes, wearing a watch worth more than their annual income. They took everything, the watch, the wallet, even his wedding ring. When Ethan tried to speak, tried to tell them who he was, the words came out wrong, confused. His mind was fractured, memory slipping through his fingers like sand. They left him with nothing but the clothes on his back and a head injury that erased 5 years of his life. For months, Ethan existed in a fog. He knew his hands, he knew how to work, but names, faces, his past, all of it was locked behind a door he couldn't open. The villagers gave him simple tasks, mending nets, hauling catches. He became just another nameless worker, another soul forgotten by the world. The memories returned in pieces, a woman's laugh, the smell of jasmine perfume, the word Clara that made his chest ache, though he didn't know why. Each fragment was agony, like his mind was reassembling itself, one painful shard at a time. It took 4 years before he remembered his name, another 6 months before he remembered everything else. When the full weight of his past crashed back into his consciousness, Ethan collapsed on a dock and wept. He had a wife, a life, an empire, and he had been dead to them all this time. The journey back took everything he had,
He worked, he saved, he begged rides from truck drivers and walked when there were no rides to beg. The man who once flew in private jets now slept under bridges. When he finally reached his city, the skyline had changed. New buildings, new lights. 5 years was a lifetime in a place like this. His mansion, the home where he had carried Clara over the threshold, now belonged to someone else. Sold. The gate code was different. Even the garden looked wrong. He found Clara at a charity gala, the same foundation events they used to host together. She wore emerald green, his favorite color on her. She was smiling. The man beside her had his hand on the small of her back. Lucas Manning, his business partner, his closest friend. Ethan stood across the street, hidden in shadows, watching the woman he loved laugh at something Lucas whispered in her ear, watching her lean into him the way she used to lean into Ethan. He had built an empire from nothing. Now he couldn't even afford the price of admission to see his own wife. The journalist's name was Maya Chen. She found Ethan sleeping in a subway station, notebook clutched to his chest. She was investigating Blake Technologies for a story on corporate corruption, digging into the suspicious timing of Ethan's death and Lucas's rapid consolidation of power. She noticed the scars first, the distinctive pattern across his temple, documented in old accident reports. Then his hands, the way he held a pen, the unconscious gestures of a man who once commanded boardrooms. "I know who you are," she whispered. Together, they uncovered the truth buried in offshore accounts and falsified documents. Lucas had sabotaged the plane's maintenance records, paid off investigators, and rushed Ethan's death certificate through corrupt channels. With Ethan gone, Lucas inherited control of the company and positioned himself as Clara's protector in her grief. The empire Ethan built was now funding Lucas's political ambitions. But Ethan made a choice that surprised even himself. He wouldn't expose Lucas yet. First, he needed to know if Clara's heart still belonged to the man he was, not the wealth he represented. He walked into the Blake Foundation wearing borrowed clothes, dirt under his fingernails, and asked for help. Clara handed him a meal and a warm blanket. She looked into his eyes, really looked, and smiled with genuine kindness. She didn't recognize her husband. But for the first time in 5 years, she had shown him something more valuable than recognition. She had shown him her soul was still pure. The annual Blake Foundation Gala was Lucas's stage. Crystal chandeliers, champagne towers. 500 of the city's elite gathered to hear his announcement of a billion-dollar expansion. Clara stood beside him, elegant but empty, playing the role expected of her. Then the doors opened. A man in worn clothes walked through security. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lucas's face went white. Ethan moved through the ballroom like a ghost returning to haunt the living. People stepped back, whispered, but Clara's eyes locked on his hands. The scar. The one from their honeymoon when he cut himself opening champagne. The scar she used to trace with her fingertips. Her champagne glass shattered on the marble floor. "Ethan!" The word broke something open in the room. Lucas lunged forward, stammering denials, but Maya Chen was already streaming live, displaying offshore accounts, falsified documents, recorded confessions from paid-off investigators. Security descended on Lucas as the evidence played on every screen in the room. Clara crossed the distance between them, trembling, reaching for the face she thought she'd lost forever. Her fingers touched his scars, his weathered skin, proof of every day he fought to return. "You came back," she whispered through tears. Ethan pulled her close, 5 years of longing collapsing into one moment. "I promised you, nothing in this world could keep me away." Ethan didn't return to the glass towers or executive suites. He sold most of his stake in Blake Technologies, keeping only enough to secure their future. The rest went into something that mattered, the Second Chance Initiative. Shelters that offered dignity, not just beds. Job training programs, medical care, legal aid for those erased by the system. He hired the fishermen who found him, gave them real opportunities. Every person who showed him kindness during his lost years received help rebuilding their own lives. Clara worked beside him, not as the billionaire's wife, but as his partner in purpose. 6 months later, they stood on the same Costa Rican beach where they first married. No cameras, no crowds. Just 20 people who knew what love looked like when stripped of everything else. Clara slipped the ring back on his finger, the one stolen years ago, that she had tracked down and recovered. "We don't need the empire," she whispered. "We never did," he replied. They had learned what most people spend lifetimes searching for, that wealth is measured in moments, not millions, that love doesn't need luxury to survive, that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what truly matters. A second chance, truth, and each other. The camera pulls back from the beach, showing Ethan and Clara walking hand in hand along the shoreline, their footprints washing away with each wave. The sun sets behind them, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. This is more than a story about a billionaire who came back from the dead. It's about a man who discovered that the greatest wealth isn't what you own, but who stands beside you when you have nothing. Would you forgive the person who betrayed you if it meant getting your life back? Comment "second chance" if you believe true love never dies. Sometimes the greatest journey isn't climbing to the top, it's finding your way back home. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more stories that remind us what it means to be human.